Welcome back to the Art of Healing. Today it's my pleasure to introduce Helena Norberg-Hodge, who is the pioneer of the worldwide localisation movement. It's fabulous to have you here with us today, Helena.
Really good to be here.
Thank you. So I just want to actually start with how you got into what you're doing. I understand from what I've read about you that you've actually lived, or you did live, in the Himalayas for 30 years earlier in your life.
Yeah, well it's 35 years since I first went to Ladakh, or Little Tibet. It's the westernmost part of Tibet, and it had been sealed off from the outside world. So no one had been allowed to go there for the previous 40 years. So it was an amazingly untouched culture. And I went there originally as part of the film team. I was a linguist. I was expecting to spend 6 weeks there. But I just fell in love with the people and the place and decided to stay on to work on the language. And for many years I was in that part of the world for most of the year. And then it was half the year, and recently it's just a few months of a year. But it is 35 years now.
That's amazing. So what year was that when you first...
In 1975.
It's amazing. Okay, and so you're living, and you know, with all that time with all the people there, and really getting into their culture and way of living. It must have been an amazing experience.
It was amazing, and it's interesting. I find a lot of women who have come there, they all say the same thing. They say, I feel like I've come home. I feel like I must have lived here in another lifetime. And over the years, I realized that I think the reason why women just totally fall in love with it is because it was a culture where women and the feminine had a very high status. It was completely safe. I realized afterwards that it was strange that once when I was up in the mountains by myself and it was dusk, it was getting dark, and I saw a group of men coming my way, there wasn't, any fragment of fear or concern. I felt totally safe. And and it was only then that I realized I had never felt that safe before, even though I grew up in Sweden, which was a very safe place relatively, and women had a very high status in Sweden, as in most of Scandinavia. But over the years out there, I discovered that women had more real power, and it was a life that suited the feminine more than even in Scandinavia. But you have to go beyond a lot of our assumptions to see that. I mean, I would say one of the main reasons women had such a high position was that every woman had about 10 caretakers for every baby, live-in caretakers. So the motherhood, the caring was shared, so it wasn't such intense pressure. And that also makes children so much more secure. Our nuclear family is so destructive, it's too intense. And then the other thing was that the main economy was agriculture, and women were very important in that. And they were probably not completely equal to the man, probably not. But as I say, I would say they had more power than we did in Sweden.
Well, it's a really interesting way to start off this interview because I'd just like to talk really about the whole feminine now, but living there was what inspired you to get into the localisation sort of thing. So you don't have any sort of economic sort of background?
No, I had no economic background. In fact, when I was in Ladakh, I was exposed to a book called Small is Beautiful that was written by an economist named Schumacher. And that really inspired me to start taking action in Ladakh. Because what I saw was that suddenly, as Ladakh was open to the outside world, in came subsidized food, running on subsidized fuel, subsidized roads, and these huge investments in infrastructure. And essentially, through what we call economic growth, it doesn't happen by itself. It's because governments are subsidizing it, and what they're basically doing is subsidizing very long distance trade and big business, and they're destroying smaller local businesses.
Why do you think they do? Who does it actually serve at the end of the day? I mean, the theory, the country is what it's serving, but...
That's the theory was that, but if you actually study it, which I have done since then now for 30 years, I've worked with eminent economists from around the world, and For 30 years, and for 20 years with a group of people, I helped to set up something called a Forum on Globalisation. So we were studying the impact of these trade treaties and finance deregulation on different countries for a while. In order to understand why governments do it, I think you have to go back to the beginning. And the beginning was a wealthy elite in Europe sending people across the world to essentially enslave people and to force them away from growing things for themselves to producing cotton or going into the mines, producing tea, coffee for Europe. And at that same time, theories about economic growth formulated the idea of comparative advantage, which was it's in your interest to specialize for export instead of producing for yourself.
Well, it's actually interesting because I actually did a management degree myself, and I actually have done a little bit on economics, so a lot of it's based on Graham and Nash and the gains theory, isn't it? I mean, in that movie, My Brilliant Career with Russell Crowe in it, that's all about that whole theory of comparative advantage and opportunity cost, where they're saying that it's best for each country to produce as much as they can of what they naturally grow. Tell me if I'm correct, and then to export that,
That's
and
right.
then. But that's the model that actually is broken down, isn't it?
But it came in much earlier with someone named Ricardo, who's the one who came up with this theory of comparative advantage, and that's basically what left and right politically has been pursuing forever. And it's completely mad because it's leading to importing and exporting the same products, and we're only doing that to make multinational banks and corporations richer. And even our trade in money is part of that problem. We're allowing for speculation on the value of currency. So the creation of the market, the global market, is really something now that we've got to understand, because things are falling apart.
Well, they are, and I mean, as much as they are, and that's a bad thing in some ways, as I was saying to you before we started talking, it's always good, you've got to have the yin and yang, you've got to have both sides of the coin. So I think perhaps it's making people on a lot of levels think about it a different way, that we can actually survive, and of course what you're talking about is localisation, which is buying and spending money in your local area, which is what farmers markets are doing, which there's a lot of them in Australia now, aren't there?
Yeah, and I helped to start them here, and help also in Victoria and places 11 years ago, and we've done the same in England and many other countries. And it's fabulous to see the local food movement growing globally, and because it's demonstrating that you can actually increase profit to the farmer, reduce the price of really healthy fresh food, organic food to the consumer, and most importantly, when you shorten the distances, you encourage farmers to diversify. In the long distances, they can't survive unless they do monoculture, one thing on a larger and larger scale, and that is anti-ecological, and it's less efficient because you get less per unit of land. If you actually allow for diversity, often including some animals, you actually vastly reduce the use of land, of water, of inputs, and you get higher productivity. So if we understand, on a crowded planet, we just can't afford large-scale industrial agriculture. If we're looking at resource use, the efficiency of the big is the efficiency for them, basically to earn a lot of money, because we subsidize them to use a lot of oil and technology and transport. And so what we're doing is we're subsidizing unemployment and pollution at the same time, and we're producing less food per acre. So it's a really important message to get out. We need to support the local food economy right now, whatever we can do as individual consumers, but also at the community level we could do a lot more, because we need to have some of the infrastructure locally. Community-based kitchens where food can be processed. In some communities now they're also helping to get the truck that will bring things in from the farmers in the region. And we need to change regulations, and that also means we need to start lobbying government to support local food economies instead of the global. So I really hope people will think about it, because if we were able to change the food economy worldwide, we would be doing more than anything else we can possibly do to reduce global warming, to reduce unemployment, and to reduce poverty. So it's like a really, really positive thing.
And it's great because people, I think, we're all starting to understand that that's the way that we need to go. I was actually just doing some research myself. I think somewhere in the US they've started an organisation where they have volunteers go around the neighbourhoods and pick the fruit off people's trees. So because people often don't have time and they've inherited trees and they're running around working all the time. So a lot of this fruit is just going to waste. And there's all this type of fruit, and they're actually taking it to the next level where they're actually then preserving it. And then it's an amazing business. And it made me think, well, we could be doing that here, and in fact they are moving it out across globally as well. But those sort of initiatives.
Absolutely.
So,
a really good one is right here, started by a friend of mine in Melbourne. It's called Permablitz, where they have volunteers that will go, a group of volunteers will go and do your garden into a permaculture garden, turn it into really productive vegetable growing, fruit trees, maybe some chickens, whatever. And if you volunteer 3 times as part of the team, you get your garden done for free.
What
as
a
a volunteer.
fabulous idea.
But I do also want to stress that it's really important that we think about farmers as well, because we can't get all the food we need from the garden, obviously. And the problem is that at the moment the government subsidies are pushing things in the opposite direction, so we need to really strengthen particularly farmers markets, community supported agriculture. And we need to be really aware that there's a lot of money going into trying to persuade us that local food doesn't reduce CO2 emissions. So there are all these studies being done that tell, like in Britain where the movement is quite strong, there have been a lot of articles and studies that say, oh, no, if you're worried about CO2 emissions, it's actually better to buy your land from New Zealand, because in New Zealand they use hydropower, and in Britain, if you buy British land, it's done with dirty, coal energy. Those studies don't look at all the farms that are beginning to support the local food economy, where the energy is, nothing compared to buying it from New Zealand. So a lot of these studies are false. Unfortunately, a lot of the microcredit, a lot of the schools are actually taking people away from the local economy, and they're creating, with microcredit, often women are encouraged to leave some animals and, a cow and some food growing in order to start a fashion, sewing industry or something to sell to the city or to sell abroad. And unfortunately, while we have this unstable financial market, they end up very vulnerable when they become so dependent on export or on the consumer culture. Because, we really need to be looking at a shift away from the consumer culture, and fresh, healthy food should be seen as a basic human right. And that doesn't mean that in the long run, everybody should stay as a farmer. But right now, food security is a major issue. So anybody who's supporting projects in the so-called third world, I hope they'll think about that.
Well, thank you because I think a lot of us are sort of aware of the microcredit sort of industry, and that's right. Women who are sort of making baskets and things like that. But that's an interesting. It's made me think anyway. So thank you for that.
Well, it is a big thing, and I mean, what we try to encourage with like the fair trade movement is that the label should actually show a commitment to making sure that the producers are not completely dependent on export. It's that complete dependence for their livelihood that leaves them really vulnerable. From my point of view, the most important thing right now is actually education as action, education as activism, to inform ourselves better and to inform others. And that's why we made the film, to try to have something that can go around
yes.
Really.
So actually we've just reviewed that DVD in our latest issue of the Art of Healing magazine. So just tell us again, so the name of it is The Economics of Happiness?
Yeah, The Economics of Happiness.
We will actually have to close about now. So thank you so much for sharing everything that you have shared with us today. It's really valuable.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.